Welcome to Calvin's Stories, where a man who built everything refuses to be erased. Enjoy.
My name is Mitchell Elliott. I'm 51 years old. On a Tuesday evening in October, I walked into the Dayton Masonic Center carrying a plaque in one hand and a manila folder in the other. The plaque was mine. The folder was my son's whole life falling apart. 140 people were inside that ballroom eating filet mignon and listening to my boy talk about how he built everything from nothing. He was standing at a podium beneath a banner that read, Dylan Elliott Development, self-made since day one. And I was standing in the lobby with work boots on, reading that banner through the glass doors, feeling my heart beat and my scarred knuckles. What happened next changed every relationship in that room. It ended a business. It started an investigation. And it broke something between a father and son that I'm still not sure can be repaired. But if I'm going to tell you what I did at that gala, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because the man who walked through those doors that night was not the same man who handed his son $94,000 and a dream 4 years earlier. Before I go back, let me say this. If you're listening to this and you've ever been erased by someone you built up with your own hands, this story is for you. Welcome to our channel. We tell stories about people who carried the weight and got written out of the credit. If that's ever been your life, hit subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Because what I'm about to tell you, it's the kind of thing that sounds impossible until you've lived it, and then it sounds like Tuesday. To understand how I got to that podium, you have to go back 26 years to a single white van with Elliott Electric hand-painted on the side in letters my wife Linda helped me stencil on a Saturday morning. I started Elliott & Sons Electric in 1997 with a van, a set of tools my father left me, and a contractor's license I studied for during 18 months of night classes, while working days pulling wire for a company that paid me $14 an hour. Linda and I had just had Dylan. We were living in a 2-bedroom rental in Kettering, and every dollar I earned went into one of 3 places: the mortgage fund, the baby, or the van. Linda kept a notebook on the kitchen counter tracking every expense down to the penny. I still have that notebook. The cover is water-stained from the time Dylan knocked his bottle off the high chair. And inside, in Linda's handwriting, is every receipt from the first year of the business. $53,000 in revenue, $21,000 in profit. We celebrated with a pizza from Marion's and a bottle of wine that cost $9. By 2005, I had 6 employees. By 2020, 12, 14. I built that company the way you build anything real. One job at a time, one referral at a time, one handshake at a time. I did residential and commercial. I wired the new wing of Good Samaritan Hospital. I did the electrical on 3 school renovations for the Dayton Public Schools District. I was the contractor other contractors called when they hit something they couldn't figure out. My hands tell the story better than I can. I've got a scar across my left palm from a junction box that slipped in 2003. I've got burns on both forearms from a panel that arced during a retrofit in 2009. I've got calluses so thick my wedding ring wore a groove into the skin underneath it. And when Linda died in 2018, I wore that groove bare for a year before I could take the ring off. I wore that groove. I raised Dylan on job sites, not because I didn't have childcare. Linda handled that until she got sick. But because I wanted him to see what work looked like. Real work. The kind where your back hurts at the end of the day and your hands smell like copper and PVC, and you drive home knowing that the lights in someone's house work because you made them work. He was on his first site at 12, holding a flashlight for me in a crawl space while I ran conduit. By 16, he had his own tool belt. By 20, he could read a blueprint faster than half my crew. I thought we were building something together. That was the whole point of the name. Elliott & Sons. Not Elliott and Son. Sons, plural, because I wanted the name to outlast both of us. I wanted Dylan's kids to see that name on a van someday and know where they came from. When Dylan turned 24, he came to me with a business plan. Real estate development. He wanted to buy distressed properties in the Dayton market, renovate them, and sell or lease them. He had spreadsheets. He had market analysis. He had that look in his eyes that I recognized because I'd seen it in my own mirror 30 years earlier. The look of a young man who believes he can build something. I gave him $94,000. Not a loan, a gift. Startup capital from a father to a son, pulled from the equity line on my house, and 26 years of savings. I co-signed his first commercial loan, $320,000 from First Federal, because he didn't have the credit history to qualify a loan. I put my name, my license, and my reputation on the line for him. And I did it gladly, because that's what fathers do. You pour everything you have into the next generation, and you trust them to carry it forward. For the first year, Dylan credited me publicly. At the ribbon cutting for his first completed project, a 4-unit residential conversion on Wayne Avenue, he stood at the microphone and said, "None of this happens without my father, Mitchell Elliott, the best electrician and the best man I know." I was standing in the back of the room in my work boots, and I cried. Linda had been gone 14 months. Hearing my son say those words in front of 40 people, it was the closest I'd felt to her since the funeral, because she would have been so proud of both of us. That was the last time Dylan said my name in public with pride. It started small, the way these things always do. Dylan married Amelia Chen 6 months after that ribbon cutting. Amelia came from money. Her parents owned a chain of dental practices across Southwest Ohio, and her father had connections with every developer and banker in the region. Amelia was smart, polished, and ambitious in a way that made the air in the room feel thinner. She wore clothes that cost more than my monthly truck payment, and she had a way of looking at my work boots that made me feel like I'd tracked mud into a museum. 3 months after the wedding, Dylan called me on a Thursday evening. I was in my workshop rewiring a vintage lamp for a client, a small job, the kind I still took because I liked working with my hands, because it kept me connected to the craft. Dylan's voice was careful, practiced. He said, "Dad, Amelia and I have been talking about the brand, about how we present the company going forward. We think it might be stronger to streamline the messaging, focus on the development side." I asked him what that meant. He said, "We're going to adjust the name on some of the marketing materials, just to keep it clean." What he meant was, they were removing "and Sons" from everything. The website, the business cards, the permit filings, the brochures. Within a month, Elliott and Sons Development became Dylan Elliott Development. My name disappeared from every document like I'd never existed. I told myself it was just marketing. Kids rebrand. It's what they do. I told myself it didn't matter what the sign said as long as the work was real. But then the work started disappearing too. The first project where I noticed was the Oakwood renovation, a 12-unit apartment complex that Dylan purchased for $410,000 and planned to flip for $850,000. I did the full electrical redesign. 60 hours of my time, plus materials, plus 2 of my guys working weekends for 3 weeks. When the marketing brochure came out, the renovation photos, my renovation photos showing my wiring, my panel upgrades, my lighting design, were credited to Elliott Development Design Studio. I called Dylan and asked what the design studio was. He paused for 2 beats too long and said, "It's just a department name, Dad, for the investor materials." There was no design studio. There was no department. There was me on a ladder at 11 at night, running wire through 50-year-old walls while my son slept in a house I helped him buy. I want to tell you I confronted him then. I want to tell you I drew a line, but I didn't. Because he was my son. Because Linda was gone and Dylan was all I had. Because every time I started to get angry, I'd remember him at 16 holding that flashlight in the crawl space, asking me to explain the difference between 14 gauge and 12 gauge wire, and my heart would override my brain. So I kept working, and Dylan kept erasing. The pattern had 2 faces, and I lived behind both of them. In public, Dylan was warm, generous, the kind of son people praised. At the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce meetings, he would mention me occasionally. My dad's the one who taught me everything about buildings. And the room would nod approvingly, and someone would pat me on the shoulder, and I would smile. Because what else do you do when your son throws you a bone in front of people who think he's wonderful? In private, the temperature was different. I remember a Tuesday in March. Dylan had just closed on his biggest project, a mixed-use development on East 3rd Street, 3 commercial units on the ground floor, 12 apartments above, $1.2 million in projected value. I'd done the electrical assessment, identified $200,000 in needed upgrades, and created the remediation plan that made the deal possible. That evening, Dylan posted a photo on LinkedIn showing himself standing in the empty building with the caption, "Day 1 of our biggest project yet. Everything I've learned, I taught myself on sites like this one." I read that caption sitting in my van in the parking lot of a Speedway gas station. I read it 3 times. I taught myself. As if the 20 years I spent teaching him meant nothing. As if the calluses on my hands were decorative. The next morning, Dylan called and asked if I could come look at a load calculation for the 3rd Street building. He needed my expertise. He just didn't need anyone to know about it. "Dad, can you come by the site? Don't park out front, though. Use the alley entrance. I've got investors walking through at noon, and I don't want the van there." The van. Elliott and Sons Electric. Hand-painted by his dead mother. He didn't want it in the frame. I went. I parked in the alley. I did the load calculation. And when I left, I sat in that van for 15 minutes with the engine off, staring at the letters Linda had stenciled, and I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as a slow leak. Not a break. A leak. The kind that lets the pressure out so gradually you don't realize you're empty until you try to lift something and can't. Then came the Chamber of Commerce dinner. Dylan was receiving a Young Entrepreneur Award, an honor I'd been quietly told by 2 board members was partly based on the quality of the renovation work on his projects. My renovation work. Dylan called me the week before and said I couldn't attend. His exact words, "Dad, they expect founders, not tradespeople. It's just optics. Founders, not tradespeople." As if the 2 were different species. As if the man who founded a company with a van and a dream was not also a tradesperson. As if trades were something to be ashamed of. I stayed home. I ate leftover chili and watched a Reds game that I don't remember. The next day I saw the photos online. Dylan at the head table. Amelia beside him in a dress that probably cost $1,000. Her parents seated across from the mayor, laughing, holding champagne glasses. The whole table gleaming with the kind of confidence that comes from never having crawled through an attic in August. My phone rang while I was looking at those photos. It was my neighbor, Helen. She said, "Mitchell, I saw Dylan at the chamber dinner on the news. You must be so proud." And I said, "I am." Because what was I supposed to say? That my son told me I wasn't the right kind of person to sit at his table. That the award he received was for work I did. That the young entrepreneur everyone was celebrating learned entrepreneurship in my van. If someone you raised is telling the world they built everything alone while you're still holding the foundation together, you're not bitter for noticing. You're awake. And the question isn't whether they'll ever say thank you. It's how long you'll keep waiting. Here's where it went from painful to criminal. In January, I received a 1099 form in the mail. For those who don't know, a 1099 is a tax document. It reports payments made to independent contractors. This 1099 was from Dylan Elliott Development. It listed a payment of $94,000 to Mitchell Elliott for contractor services rendered. My $94,000. The startup capital I gave my son, the gift, reclassified as a contractor payment. Which meant 2 things. First, Dylan had erased my investment entirely. On paper, I wasn't a stakeholder, I was hired help. Second, I now owed federal and state taxes on $94,000 of income I never earned. Dylan's accountant had turned my generosity into my tax burden. My hands were shaking when I opened that envelope. My body understood before my brain caught up. I called Dylan. He didn't answer. I called again. His office manager picked up and said, with a voice so rehearsed it sounded like a recording, "Mr. Elliott is in a meeting with investors. Can I take a message?" Mr. Elliott. She called my son Mr. Elliott while talking to the man who gave him the name. I drove to his office. The receptionist, a young woman I'd watched Dylan hire, whose desk I had wired the outlets for during a weekend renovation, told me he was unavailable. I sat in the lobby for 2 hours. Dylan walked through once, saw me, and came over. He put his hand on my shoulder, the same gesture, every time, and said, "Dad, I'll have my accountant sort it out. It's just a filing error. Don't worry about it." It was not a filing error. I know because I asked a tax attorney, and she pulled the filing and showed me that the reclassification was done deliberately, backdated to align with the original transfer date, and accompanied by a fabricated service agreement I had never signed. Someone had typed my name on a contract I'd never seen. Hyped. That was the night I sat in my workshop and looked at the Contractor of the Year plaque. It was hanging on the wall above my workbench, gathering dust. I'd received it in 2019 at the Dayton Masonic Center, the same building where Dylan was now planning his investor gala. The plaque had my name on it. Mitchell Elliott, Master Electrician, Contractor of the Year. I ran my thumb over the engraving, and I thought about throwing it in the trash. What was the point of a plaque that said you were excellent at something your own son was ashamed of? I didn't throw it away. Something told me to keep it. I didn't know why yet. 3 weeks later, I found out. The diner was called Sam's, on Smithville. Frank Castellano was already sitting in a booth by the window when I walked in. He was 54, stocky, with a gray crew cut, and the kind of hands that suggested he'd done real work before he'd done business work. Frank was Dylan's business partner. Had been for 2 years. I'd met him twice at project walkthroughs and resented him both times because Frank occupied the space in Dylan's professional life that I was supposed to occupy. Frank was the partner. I was the subcontractor. That was the arrangement Dylan had built. And every time I saw Frank's name next to Dylan's on a letterhead, I felt it like a bruise. So when Frank called me and asked to meet, I almost didn't go. I thought Dylan had sent him. I thought it was another management exercise. Another soft hand on the shoulder. Another, "Don't worry about it, Dad." I was wrong about Frank. I was wrong about almost everything. Frank set a manila folder on the table between our coffee cups. It was thick, at least 60 pages. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read and said, "Mitchell, I joined this company because of your son's reputation. But I've spent 2 years learning that reputation was yours." He borrowed it and forgot to return it. He opened the folder. What Frank showed me in that folder changed everything I thought I knew about my own son. 62 pages. Permit applications where Mitchell Elliott was listed as seasonal labor. Investor prospectuses where Dylan claimed sole design credit for buildings I engineered. Internal memos. Coaching staff on how to redirect questions about Mitchell's involvement. An email from Amelia to Dylan reading, "The less your father's name appears on anything, the better. Investors want to see innovation, not inheritance." And the one that hit hardest, a copy of Dylan's pitch deck for the gala investors, containing a slide that read, "No family money, no inherited connections. Everything I built started from zero. Started from zero." While my $94,000 and my co-signed loan and my 26 years of expertise sat invisible beneath the foundation of everything he claimed to have built alone. Frank set his coffee cup down, looked at the permit copies, and said very quietly, "This is fraud, Mitchell. Not just disrespect. He's telling investors he has design and engineering expertise he doesn't have. He's using your license numbers on permits without proper attribution. And the 1099, that's tax fraud. I won't be part of it anymore. I sat there for a long time. The diner was playing country music, something with a steel guitar, and the waitress refilled my coffee twice without me noticing. I was looking at those pages and feeling something shift inside me. Not anger exactly. Something older than anger. Something structural, like a beam that had been carrying weight for years, finally settling into its true position. I said, "What do you want me to do with this?" Frank said, "Whatever you need to, but you should know the gala is in 3 weeks at the Masonic Center. 140 guests, the development commissioner, 3 major investors, and Dylan's planning a toast about being self-made." The Masonic Center, the same room where I received my Contractor of the Year plaque in 2019. The same room where the Dayton building community stood and clapped for Mitchell Elliott. And now my son was going to stand in that room and tell 140 people he built everything alone. Frank left the dossier with me and paid for both coffees. At the door, he turned back and said, "Your boy listed you as seasonal labor on every permit application for 3 years. 62 pages of proof. Do what you need to do." I sat in that booth for another hour. I read every page, and somewhere around page 40, a memo from Dylan to his office manager, with the instruction, "If my father calls, tell him I'm with investors. He doesn't know when to stop talking about wiring and junction boxes." I felt the last thread of patience snap. Not dramatically, quietly, like a wire pulled too tight, finally giving way with a soft ping that only the person holding it can hear. I drove home. I sat in my workshop. I looked at the plaque. And I started to plan. The 3 weeks between Frank's dossier and the gala were the longest of my life. Not because I was afraid, because I had to be careful. I made copies of everything. I took the 62 pages to a FedEx office and made 3 complete sets. One for me. One for my tax attorney. One sealed in an envelope in my safety deposit box at the credit union on Far Hills. I scanned every page and saved the files on a thumb drive that I kept in the pocket of my work jacket. I called my tax attorney, Sandra Price, and walked her through the 1099 situation. She went quiet for about 30 seconds, which, if you've ever talked to a lawyer, means you've said something significant. And then she said, "Mitchell, this isn't a filing error. This is constructive fraud. You need to document everything, and you need to decide whether you want to resolve this privately or publicly." I told her I'd let her know. I thought about Frank's motivation. I'll be honest. For 3 full days, I suspected Frank was setting me up. Maybe he was protecting Dylan. Maybe he wanted me to make a scene at the gala, so Dylan could paint me as the bitter, unhinged father and justify cutting me out entirely. I called Frank on the second day and asked him straight, "Are you setting me up?" Frank laughed, not a happy laugh, and said, "Mitchell, I'm dissolving the partnership regardless. I've got 2 viable projects I'm keeping, and your son can have the rest. I'm telling you this because it's the right thing to do, and because those investors deserve to know that Thorexper Singseis Pepper Sidoring they're paying for belongs to a man they've never met." I believed him. Not because I'm trusting by nature. 26 years and contracting burns that out of you. But because the documents were real. I checked every permit number against the county database. I verified every investor filing against the SEC records Sandra pulled. Everything Frank gave me was authentic. My son really had listed me as seasonal labor. My son really had told investors he started from zero. My son really had erased me from the story of his own life. The week before the gala, Dylan called me. His voice was warm. warmer than it had been in months. He said he wanted to take me to dinner. Just us, Dad, father and son. I feel like we haven't connected in a while. We went to Pine Club. Dylan ordered a steak. He asked about my health. He asked about the business. He touched my arm across the table and said, "Dad, I know I've been busy, but I want you to know everything I am is because of you." I looked at him across that white tablecloth and I saw both faces at once. The loving son performing warmth, the businessman who had written seasonal labor next to my name 62 times. Dylan hugged me at that dinner, and I felt his hand check his phone behind my back. Even in that moment, even when he was pretending to be the son I raised, he couldn't fully commit to the performance. 2 days later, I received an email from Dylan. The subject line was, "Gala, quick note." The body read, "Dad, this one's not your crowd. I'll bring you leftovers. Love, D." Not your crowd. At the Masonic Center, where I received my Contractor of the Year plaque, where the building community of Dayton had given me a standing ovation. Not my crowd. I read that email sitting at my workbench. The plaque was 6 inches from my elbow. I picked it up and held it for a long time, feeling the weight of the metal, the sharpness of the engraved letters. And I made my decision. The morning of the gala, I ironed my khakis. Not a suit. I didn't own one, and I wasn't going to pretend to be something I wasn't. Pressed khakis, a clean white button-down, my good work boots. The ones I wore to inspections, polished but honest. I shaved carefully. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and I saw a 51-year-old man with gray at his temples, and scars on his hands, and 26 years of building in his shoulders. I looked like what I was, a master electrician and general contractor. I looked like the man Dylan was ashamed of. I put the plaque in a canvas bag. I put the folder, the full 62 pages, in a legal-size envelope. I put the thumb drive in my shirt pocket, right side, where I always kept my voltage tester. I patted the pocket once, the way I always did before walking onto a job site, checking for tools by touch. The thumb drive was smaller than a voltage tester, but heavier with consequence. 3 weeks later, that plaque would be sitting on a podium. That morning, I almost threw it in the trash, but I set it in the bag instead, and I zipped the bag shut, and I got in my van. The drive to the Masonic Center took 14 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the whole way. Every red light was a chance to turn around. Every green light was a door I walked through. I passed the Speedway where I'd read Dylan's LinkedIn post. I passed the FedEx office where I'd copied Frank's documents. I passed the turnoff to Dylan's house, the house I'd rewired as a housewarming gift. The house where Amelia had looked at my boots. I pulled into the parking lot at 7:22 p.m. The gala had started at 7. I was late on purpose. I wanted Dylan settled. I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him mid-performance. The Masonic Center was lit up. Through the tall windows I could see the ballroom. White tablecloths, centerpieces with blue hydrangeas, a projection screen at the front showing the company logo. Dylan Elliott Development, self-made since day one. I could see people moving, drinks in hand, the warm glow of a room full of money and social confidence. I could hear the bass note of conversation through the glass. I sat in the van for 4 minutes. I counted them. I put my hand on the canvas bag and felt the plaque through the fabric. Then I got out. The lobby was marble-floored and cool. A young woman at a check-in table looked at my khakis and work boots and said, "Sir, do you have an invitation?" "I'm Mitchell Elliott," I said. "Dylan's father." Her face changed. Not a lot, but enough. A micro-expression of confusion. She checked the list, didn't find my name, and looked up again. I don't see you on the guest list, Mr. Elliott." "That's about right," I said, and I walked past her into the ballroom. The room was exactly as I'd imagined it, but more. Crystal chandeliers, the ones I'd helped install during the 2017 renovation of the Masonic Center, back when the building committee asked me specifically because they trusted my electrical work. White linens on round tables, seating 10 each. A bar along the left wall. Servers carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, shrimp, tiny crostini with things on top, food that looked more like art than dinner. 140 people in suits and cocktail dresses, holding wine glasses, leaning toward each other with the easy posture of people who belong. I saw people I recognized. Linda Park, the development commissioner, standing near the bar in a navy suit, talking to someone from the city planning office. I'd done electrical work on her office renovation 2 years ago. She told me I was the most meticulous contractor she'd ever worked with. She didn't see me come in. I saw Carl and Janet Hewitt, investors in 2 of Dylan's projects. Carl had called me once, 3 years ago, asking if I could recommend a good electrician for his lake house. I'd done the work myself. He'd paid me and tipped me a bottle of Woodford Reserve and told me Dylan was a chip off the old block. He didn't know how right he was, or how wrong. I saw Amelia's parents, Dr. Richard and Evelyn Chen, seated at the head table, looking like they'd been born into that exact lighting. Evelyn was wearing a necklace that caught the chandelier light and threw tiny diamonds of reflection across the tablecloth. They had co-signed Dylan's mortgage based on his projected earnings that were built on my work, credited to a design studio that didn't exist. And I saw Dylan. He was standing near the podium, talking to a man I didn't recognize, one of the investors, probably. Dylan was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like it was made for him, which it probably was. His hair was styled, his shoes gleamed. He had that posture, chest forward, chin slightly lifted, that communicated success the way a flag communicates nation. He looked exactly like the man his LinkedIn profile described. Self-made, polished, arrived. He did not look like the boy who once held a flashlight for me in a crawl space and said, "Dad, why does electricity hum?" I found a seat at a back table. A server brought me water. The man next to me, 60-ish, tan suit, name tag reading Gerald, the Lady Dieu, said, "Hell of a turnout for the kid, huh?" I nodded. I set the canvas bag on the floor between my feet. I could feel the plaque's weight through the bottom of the bag, pressing against my ankle. I took a sip of water and tasted nothing. The salad course came. I didn't eat. The main course came. Filet mignon, roasted potatoes, asparagus with something drizzled on it. I cut the steak and moved the pieces around the plate. Gerald next to me talked about a property he was developing in Beaver Creek. I gave him one-word answers. I was watching the podium. I was watching the projection screen. I was counting minutes. At 8:15, a man in a tuxedo, the MC, some local business figure whose name I didn't catch, took the podium and introduced the evening's program. There would be a brief presentation on Dylan Elliott Development's portfolio, then a toast from Dylan, then dessert and networking. The presentation started. Slides of properties, before and after photos, renovation shots, my renovation shots, the ones from the Oakwood project, the ones from 3rd Street, the ones from Wayne Avenue, my wiring, my panel upgrades, my lighting design, credited to Elliott Development Design Studio, credited to no one, credited to the empty space where my name used to be. I watched those slides and I felt the leak in my chest stop leaking. Something sealed, something pressurized. Then Dylan took the podium. He gripped the edges with both hands. A gesture I recognized because I taught it to him. When you stand at the front of a room, I told him once when he was nervous about a high school speech, hold the podium. It grounds you. You're connected to something solid. He was using my technique at his podium, in my building, to tell a room full of people that he owed nothing to anyone. "Thank you all for being here," Dylan said. His voice was steady and warm. He smiled the smile that charmed investors and commissioners and waitresses and everyone else who only saw one face. When I started this company, I had a vision, and I want to be honest with you about something. The room leaned in. People love the word honest from a man in a good suit. "I came from nothing," Dylan said. Behind him, the projector displayed a new slide. I couldn't read it from my seat, but I knew what it said because I'd seen it in Frank's dossier. No family money, no inherited connections. Everything I built started from zero. I heard those words and I felt a vibration in my hands. Not shaking. Vibration. Like a wire carrying current. Like my body was completing a circuit. I reached down and unzipped the canvas bag. I took out the plaque. I took out the envelope. I stood up. Gerald looked at me. The woman across the table looked at me. The server carrying a tray of desserts stopped mid-step and looked at me. I walked toward the podium. I walked past tables of people who knew me and didn't know me. Past Linda Park, who turned and blinked. Past the Hewitts, who went still. Past Amelia's parents, who watched me pass their table with expressions that started as confusion and calcified into something harder as they saw what I was carrying. Dylan saw me coming from 30 feet away. His mouth was still moving. He was mid-sentence about the values of self-reliance and vision. But his eyes locked on me, and I watched his voice slow down like a machine running out of power. By the time I reached the podium, he had stopped talking entirely. I set the plaque on the podium, right next to the microphone. The metal made a sound against the wood, a solid, definitive sound, like a gavel. Contractor of the Year, Mitchell Elliott, 2019. Awarded in this room, on this stage. Excuse me, I said. My voice was steady. 26 years of giving instructions on job sites, of projecting over table saws and generators and HVAC units, had given me a voice that carried. I'm Mitchell Elliott, Dylan's father. I need to borrow the screen for a moment. I turned to the projection tech, a young guy at a laptop near the sidewall, and held up the thumb drive. Can you display what's on this? The tech looked at Dylan. Dylan's face was a mask being worn by a man who had forgotten how to breathe. He said nothing. The tech looked at me, looked at the drive, and maybe because I looked like a man who was not going to ask twice, took it. The first image appeared on the screen. Dylan's slide. No family money, no inherited connections. Everything I built started from zero. The tech had put it side by side, the way I'd formatted the files. And next to it, filling the other half of the screen, was a scan of my canceled check. $94,000 made out to Dylan Elliott, dated 14 months before the company's incorporation. Memo line, for your dream, love, Dad. The room changed. I don't mean the mood, I mean the physical room. The air pressure shifted. Conversations that had been murmuring at back tables went silent. Glasses stopped clinking. Silverware stopped moving. 140 people were looking at a screen, showing a father's gift next to a son's denial of that gift. And the contradiction was so stark, so naked, so complete, that the room held its breath. Dylan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. That's my check, I said. $94,000. Not an investor's money, not a loan. A father's life savings, given so his son could build something. 14 months before your company existed. I nodded to the tech. The next image appeared. The co-signed loan document. My signature on the bottom line. $320,000 from First Federal. And that's my credit. My name. My guarantee. The reason you qualified for your first commercial loan. The next image. A permit application for the Oakwood project. My name in the contractor field. Not as co-developer, not as consultant, but as seasonal labor. The room could read it on the screen. Seasonal labor. A master electrician with 26 years of experience and a plaque from this very building, listed as seasonal labor by his own son. I felt the room's attention like heat, not on me, on the space between me and Dylan, on the gap between what the screen showed and what they'd been told. Every person in that room was doing the same thing, recalculating, rereading every LinkedIn post, every brochure, every handshake, every toast through the lens of what was now undeniable on that 12-foot screen. I have 62 pages, I said. I held up the envelope. Permit applications where I'm listed as seasonal labor. Investor prospectus is where my design work is credited to a department that doesn't exist. Internal memos instructing staff to redirect my phone calls. And a 1099 form reclassifying my $94,000 gift as contractor payment, creating a tax liability I never agreed to for income I never received. If you've ever been the person nobody believes, if you've ever held the truth while the room trusted someone else's performance, you know what that silence feels like. You know what it's like to finally be seen. And if you're still holding that truth, still waiting, still watching the performance continue, please hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is not over, and neither is yours. Dylan found his voice. It was smaller than before. The charm was gone. What was left was the voice I'd heard on the phone instructing his office manager to redirect my calls. "Dad," he said. He tried to laugh. The laugh came out like a cough. "Dad, this is not the place for this. This is exactly the place," I said. "This is the Masonic Center. I received my Contractor of the Year award on this stage in 2019. You were in the audience. You clapped. And now you're standing on this stage telling these people you built everything from nothing in a building where this community honored my work. So yes, Dylan, this is exactly the place." Dylan looked at Amelia. Amelia was staring at the screen with an expression that had passed through shock and arrived at calculation. I could see her already composing the narrative she would use after tonight, already editing the story, already shifting from co-founder to I had no idea. The same instinct her husband had inherited, or maybe the one she'd taught him. "These documents are fraudulent," Dylan said. His voice was louder now. He was reaching for authority, reaching for the podium grip confidence I'd taught him. "My father he's having a hard time. Since my mother died, he's been..." "The development commissioner is in the room," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Commissioner Park, you renovated your office 2 years ago. I did the electrical. You told me I was the most meticulous contractor you'd ever worked with. Do you remember?" Linda Park was standing near the bar with her wine glass frozen at waist height. She looked at me. She looked at the screen. She set the wine glass down on the nearest table, carefully, precisely, the way someone sets down an object when they need both hands free. "Smasoa. Naroas were Ro. Salsa were carried across the silent room. So I'm going to need copies of everything on that screen." That was the moment. Not the documents, not my speech, not the check or the loan or the permit applications. It was Linda Park setting down her wine glass. It was the development commissioner, a woman whose approval Dylan needed for every project in the city, publicly acknowledge. What I was showing was such serious enough to investigate. So I watched the room respond. Carl Hewitt pulled out his phone and started photographing the screen. Janet Hewitt put her hand on Carl's arm, not to stop him, but to steady herself. Gerald, the man from my table, was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, shaking his head slowly. A woman I didn't know at a center table had her hand over her mouth. A man near the back, one of the investors, based on his table placement, was already typing on his phone with both thumbs. And then Frank Castellano stood up. Frank was seated at a table near the front. The partner's table. The table where I should have been sitting. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and turned to face the room. Not the podium. The room. "My name is Frank Castellano," he said. "I've been Dylan's business partner for 2 years. I want to confirm that everything Mitchell is showing you is accurate. I compiled that dossier myself from our company files. I've watched Dylan systematically erase his father's contributions, saw Yerasaus watcher from permits, from investor materials, from the company narrative, for the entire duration of our partnership." Frank looked at Dylan. Dylan's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. "I was told Mitchell had no involvement in the company," Frank continued. "I was told he was a retired electrician who occasionally consulted. What I learned over 2 years was that the engineering expertise this company sells, the renovation design, the structural assessment capability, the reason investors trust our project valuations, belongs to Mitchell. Dylan borrowed his father's reputation and forgot to return it." The room exhaled. I could hear it. A collective release of held breath, a sound like a sail catching wind. The noise of a room full of people realizing simultaneously that the story they'd been told was not the story that was true. Dylan gripped the podium. His knuckles were white. The charm was completely gone now. Stripped away like paint thinner on a bad finish, revealing the raw wood underneath. What was left was a 28-year-old man in an expensive suit with nothing to say. "Dad," he whispered. But the microphone caught it and sent it across the room. That whisper, "Dad," spoken not as an address but as a plea, was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard from my son. And despite everything, despite the 62 pages and the 1099 and the seasonal labor and the not your crowd and all of it, that whisper hit me in the exact place where love lives, and I felt it. But I didn't take it back. Because taking it back would mean taking back the truth. And the truth had earned its moment. I picked up the plaque. I held it for a second, felt the weight, the engraving, the 26 years it represented, and then I set it down again. I left it on the podium, right next to the microphone, right under the screen that showed my check and my loan and my son's denial of both. I turned and walked out of the ballroom. Through the lobby, past the check-in table where the young woman was now standing with her hand over her mouth, through the glass doors, into the October air that hit my face like cold water. I got in my van. I sat there. I put my hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the way I'd been driving for 35 years. My hands were steady. My chest felt different. Not the leak, not the pressure. Something else. An opening. Like a window that had been painted shut for years. Finally, cracking free. I drove home. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in that van was the first comfortable silence I'd experienced in 4 years. The earthquake started before I got home. My phone began buzzing at 9:47 p.m., 25 minutes after I left the Masonic Center. The first text was from a number I didn't recognize. "Mitchell, this is Carl Hewitt. I owe you an apology. Can we talk this week?" The second was from Frank. "You did the right thing. Commissioner Park has the thumb drive. Her office took it from the tech." The third was from Helen, my neighbor. "Mitchell, what happened at the gala?" "My friend Donna was there, and she's calling everyone she knows." Over the next 48 hours, 3 things happened in rapid succession that dismantled Dylan's world with the efficiency of a controlled demolition. First, the investors. Carl Hewitt and 2 other major investors, names I later learned were Pradeep Mathur and Ellen Chase, demanded emergency audits of every project in Dylan's portfolio. They hired independent assessors who discovered that Dylan had inflated project valuations by $340,000, primarily by claiming design and engineering capabilities that were actually mine. My unlicensed design credits, work I did as a father, not as a formally contracted professional, were being presented to investors as in-house capabilities that justified higher project costs. When the assessors pulled the permits and compared them to the investor prospectuses, the discrepancies were, as Sandra Price later told me, stunningly blatant. Second, the commissioner. Linda Park opened a formal permit fraud inquiry within 72 hours of the gala. Her office subpoenaed Dylan's permit applications going back 3 years and found the pattern Frank had documented. Systematic misrepresentation of contractor roles, attribution of licensed work to unlicensed entities, and, most seriously, the use of my contractor's license number on applications where I was listed as seasonal labor rather than supervising contractor, which violated Ohio Revised Code, Section 4740. Third, Frank dissolved the partnership. He retained the 2 viable projects, both in early development, both salvageable, and left Dylan with the remainder. 3 projects in various stages of completion, all now under Investa audit, all with permit complications, all bleeding money. Frank's attorney filed the dissolution papers on a Thursday. By Friday, Dylan's operating account had been frozen, pending the audit results. The dominoes fell with a precision that would have been satisfying if they hadn't been falling on my son. Amelia moved first. Her LinkedIn profile changed from co-founder Elliott Development to open to opportunities within a week of the gala. I didn't check it myself. Sandra showed me during one of our meetings with the expression of a woman who had seen many rats leave many ships. Amelia's parents, the Chens, who had co-signed Dylan's mortgage based on projected earnings that were now being revealed as inflated, received foreclosure proceedings within 90 days. Dr. Chen called Dylan once, according to Frank. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. After that, the Chens communicated exclusively through their attorney. Dylan tried damage control. He called investors. He posted on LinkedIn a carefully worded statement about a family disagreement that was unfortunately brought into a professional setting. He hired a PR consultant. He sent me an email with the subject line, "Can we talk?" that I read, but didn't answer. The damage control failed because the truth was already out, and the truth had documentation. You can't PR your way out of 62 pages of permit fraud. You can't LinkedIn your way past a canceled check that contradicts your founding story. You can't hire a consultant to undisplay a projection screen that 140 people photographed with their phones. The community recalibrated with the speed that communities always recalibrate when permission to see the truth has been publicly granted. People who had praised Dylan at chamber meetings now mentioned him with careful pauses. People who had patted me on the shoulder while telling me how proud I must be now patted me on the shoulder while telling me how sorry they were. The narrative flipped overnight, the way narratives do when the evidence is undeniable. Dylan went from impressive young entrepreneur to, "You heard what happened at the gala, right?" I became the man who was right all along, which was gratifying and hollow in equal measure, because being right all along means suffering all along, and no one apologizes for that part. I received phone calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years, other contractors, former clients, 2 members of the Masonic Center Board who had voted for my Contractor of the Year award. They said variations of the same thing. I always felt something was off. I never understood why you weren't more involved. Linda told me about the gala and I'm sorry, Mitchell. The plaque sat on the podium at the Masonic Center for 2 days before anyone thought to return it to me. A building manager named Theo brought it to my house in a cardboard box with a note that said, "This belongs to you. Sorry it took us so long to bring it back." I didn't think he was just talking about the plaque. The investigation concluded 4 months after the gala. Dylan's company was fined $68,000 for permit violations. 2 project permits were revoked, pending reapplication with correct contractor attribution. The IRS opened a review of the 1099 reclassification, and Sandra informed me that I would not owe taxes on the $94,000. It would be properly redocumented as a gift, which is what it always was. Dylan and I did not speak for 5 months. 6 months after the gala, I was in my workshop. Same workbench, same tools, same van parked outside with the letters Linda stenciled 26 years ago. I was finishing a kitchen remodel in Centerville for a young couple named Marcus and Jade, who reminded me of me and Linda 30 years ago. They had a 3-year-old who watched me work with the same wide eyes Dylan used to have. And one afternoon, Marcus asked if I could teach the kid how to wire a light switch. I said yes before he finished asking. And sitting there in my workshop, with the plaque on the workbench beside their kitchen blueprints, I recorded a voice memo on my phone. Not for anyone in particular. For myself. For the record. For whatever comes after. I'm finishing a kitchen remodel in Centerville for a young couple who remind me of me and Linda 30 years ago. They asked if I could teach their kid how to wire a light switch. I said yes before they finished asking. And I realized that's enough. Being useful, being respected, being wanted in the room. That's the whole thing. The plaque was sitting next to the blueprints, catching the workshop light. It didn't look like evidence anymore. It didn't look like a weapon. It looked like what it was. Proof of what I'd built. Sitting beside proof of what I was still building. Not a monument to what was taken. A foundation for what remains. I used to think legacy was your name on a building. I was wrong. Legacy is the kid in Centerville learning which wire is hot and which is neutral, and knowing that someone cared enough to show them the difference. I used to think family loyalty meant silence. I learned that real loyalty, the kind that costs something, sometimes means standing at a podium in your work boots and telling the truth in a room full of suits. If you're listening to this, and you've been erased by someone you built up, if your work is wearing someone else's name, and your voice has been edited out of the story, you're not crazy. You're not bitter. You're the foundation. And foundations don't disappear just because someone paints over them. This story's been told. One canceled check for $94,000, one Contractor of the Year plaque carried into a ballroom, and one manila folder with 62 pages that a stranger slid across a diner table because he couldn't stay silent anymore. If you've ever watched someone take credit for the foundation you poured, I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already. Because every week, we tell stories about people who stopped waiting for permission